What is happening out there, rotoscouts basketball fans? Happy Friday, everybody. It is Friday, right? I lose track of these things sometimes. Happy Friday to whoever's out there hanging out. Get the head count up in a minute. Interesting little slate coming up for tonight. 6 games on both sites. Got a big contest up on DraftKings. Not a completely unmanageable size field for a tournament like that. 100K up at the top, and it's like 89,000 entries as opposed to over 100,000 entries. So it's more reasonable, more winnable, a little bit. Not too bad to get, but yeah, good one up on DK. Smaller ones on FanDuel, as usual. Bigger buy-ins, smaller prize pools. Don't know how FanDuel manages to pull it off, but we'll take a look through all of it. Got some fairly low-end games to talk about. 6-gamer on both, like I said. But some very low totals, some good defensive teams. Should be some good basketball games overall, but not necessarily. Got some like wild hairs sticking out over here. Not necessarily the best DFS environments. We do have some key values already created. We've got some very, very popular stars. We've got some very popular low-end players. Got some guys that nobody wants to roster who've failed us very recently coming through again. So I'm going to go through all of it. Podegen Stoners here hanging out. Wiki Bakey Happy Hockey Prop Bets from Garden City, Colorado. Trade deadline day in the NHL. Rangers made a few moves. Some minor stuff. They missed out on, what's his face, Gunsel the other day. But they picked up Wenberg play center, and they picked up defenseman and a right wing today, I think, for peanuts. So I can deal. Seems pretty decent. Pacific 9-point in second half versus Pepperdine last night. That was not a game that I was paying any attention to. I did see there's a bit of a betting scandal going on, though, with, what was it, the Temple game? Apparently the line jump, like big line movement, and then they got completely waxed in that game yesterday. I was reading a tweet about it this morning. I don't really know the details. Wasn't something that would hit my radar normally. Not, paying attention to college basketball, not paying attention to sports betting all that much. But it seemed a little bit shady. Might come out that something, players are betting on the games and somebody found out where the players' money was going or something like that. Who knows? There is money in college sports right now, but not for everybody. So I could see that becoming an issue. Well, it's one to keep an eye on anyway. Mamba's here. What's going on, Mamba? 9.5 was a Pepperdine fave, won by 50. Woo! That's a big win. Looks like we got a solid little group hanging out here. Let me pop the sheet up on the board so you can see some familiar names up at the top, some comfy ones, some less comfy ones. Sorted by the DraftKings win rate to start the show. Looks like a couple more big ticket in terms of our top 150 exposures on the FanDuel slate than on the DraftKings slate. I think DraftKings were peaking, it looks like, around that 58% that we're getting on Karis LeVert, Brandon Miller at 59. But on the FanDuel slate, those guys are at 78 and 71. And then if you go down a few lines in line 8 there, I'm seeing DeJounte Murray in 83% of the top 150. Massive 57.4% win rate. It's projected out to nearly 50 points tonight. Juicy projection for him in kind of a cakewalk game for them. A lot of pieces from Washington and Charlotte hitting on both sides. Potentially some additional value being created in Charlotte. We'll see if Trey Mann's able to play. He's questionable. I did notice that just before the show started, Zion Williamson's public exposure on the site where I get the ownership really took a jump. I don't see any related news that would have created that. I'm not sure if they're just correcting something from earlier, if they adjusted a minor thing that had a big impact on their ownership projections, but his ownership jumped pretty significantly. He's looking good in our projections. He's down in this range here. But on the FanDuel slate, his ownership jumped to like double what we're seeing here. So keep an eye, something changes down there. But he still looks, I think, decent. It's just this will be a little bit skewed probably by the public exposure now. But one to keep an eye on. But anyway, let's talk about some ins and outs. We'll start the show with ins and outs today because we don't have that crazy a list for a change. It's actually pretty good. The outs is a significant list, but we know that already. The questionable, we have no probables. The questionables that we've got, Trey Mann, Anthony Edwards, Jordan McLaughlin, Wendell Carter Jr., Jalen Brunson, Gigi Jackson. Those are basically everybody except for Jordan McLaughlin would have an appreciable impact if they miss the game. So it's not like those are irrelevant questionables. There's just not that many of them. McLaughlin, minor minutes share right now, but Trey Mann's getting a ton of minutes, would open up a ton of opportunity in the backcourt there at this point. He's at 30, 32 in my most recent projections. You can see Vasilij Micic already up at the top of the board with a 30-minute projection on him, coming out of that team. So just going to be a mess there. Anthony Edwards obviously would create some situational value in Minnesota. Wendell Carter Jr. would presumably lead to, I would think, another Goga start if we didn't get him. Jalen Brunson obviously just kind of creates that chaos for the Knicks, elevates Miles McBride, and then just has other guys playing into the into the 40-minute range. And then G.G. Jackson is another potential piece of chaos. On the outs, everybody on this list is already out. LaMelo Ball, Leaky Black, Seth Curry, Cody Martin, Alexei Pokusevski, Mark Williams, Marvin Bagley, Landry Shamet, Dyson Daniels, Robert Covington, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, DeAnthony Melton, Monte Morris, Karl Anthony Towns, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, Max Strus, OG Anunoby, Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, Jalen Johnson, which is a biggie in Atlanta, Onyeka Okongwu, Trey Young continues to be out, Desmond Bane, Luke Kennard, who's doubtful, Scottie Pippen Jr., Derrick Rose, Marcus Smart, Yuta Watanabe, Zaire Williams. So the entire Memphis team continues to be out. Tyler Hero, Kevin Love, and Josh Richardson from Miami. So there's a little bit of value there as well. So that's everybody that's already missing. A lot of that is known. A lot of that is stuff that's, we've been kind of dealing with over the last few games, last few weeks, depending on which team you're talking about. Jalen Johnson from Atlanta is an interesting one to add to the injury list there. It's creating a lot around Bruno Fernando, who is, I'm sure, somewhere up near the top of this board. The hell is he? Oh, is he just not good on DK? All right, interesting. Bruno Fernando, 4,400 on DK, 12.9% winner, 22.6% of the top 150. On FanDuel, he's crashing through the top of the slate. Another guy owned at a pretty significant clip in the top 150, 66% against a 52% win rate. That's just giving him the typical backup run at center that I've been giving him. I've got it 25-23 in Capella's favor right now. That's not really piling anything extra on there. I do think he could see a couple additional minutes, depending on what they want to do with just, some missing bodies there. But just a good amount of value in his ridiculously low 4,200. It's been at 1.06 points per minute in 25 minutes the other night. He put up 31. You get that kind of a day at $4,200. It's not too bad for your lineups. So we're getting a lot of Bruno Fernando right now. He's also one of the most popular players on the FanDuel slate. So there's going to be a lot of public weight in that spot. Davis Bertans is another guy who's getting some uncomfortable public weight in that Charlotte and Washington game. Let me pull up Pinnacle and talk about the game environments, though, real quick. We'll pop back into the chat in just a sec. See who's showing up in the last little bit and say hi. So, Charlotte and Washington, two bad teams with a little bit of pace in that game. 2.5 point spread favoring the hometown Wizards. 226-point total there. One of the healthier totals on this low-end slate. New Orleans at Philly. New Orleans favored by 7.5 on the road, 222-point total. Orlando and the Knicks. Knicks now 1.5-point dogs at home. Was that the case earlier? Oh, yeah, I guess it was. I thought that swung for some reason. Knicks 1.5-point dogs to Orlando at home, 204.5. Low total. Minnesota, Cleveland, not getting any better at 206. 2-point spread there. Should be a good game. Assuming Anthony Edwards plays, should be a good game. Cleveland favored by 2 at home in that one. Atlanta, Memphis, 2.5-point spread. So most of these games are at least close, or all these games are at least close. 2.5-point spread favoring Atlanta in Memphis, 215.5 there. And then Miami at OKC. OKC favored by 8.5 at home. 224.5-point total. Last two games of the night aren't on either slate. 6 games to work with. So, given that we peak at a 226 in the Charlotte-Washington game and then 224.5 in the last game, with kind of several flat games in between, I do think it makes a fair amount of sense that a lot of these Washington-Charlotte pieces are coming up. we're seeing some of the, like Karis LeVert types who were just priced appropriately in the mid-range with a lot to do in the current configurations of their team are coming through. And then we're getting some pieces from Miami OKC, which I also like because that's the other high-end game on the slate. So just glancing at the board, it does look reasonable, even with some low-end games. I do think we've got some interesting opportunities for lineup building, and I like the way that the lineups were coming together when I glanced at them earlier. Aloysius is here. What's going on, Aloysius? Good to see you. Anthony Taylor. Murray Day. I think so, buddy. Mamba's here. What's up, Mamba? Trey, did I say hi to Trey? I thought I did. If I didn't say hi to Trey, what's going on, pal? Good to see you. Happy Friday. Anybody got anything crazy, interesting, fun, exciting planned for the weekend? I'll probably just be here doing my thing, projections, etc. Working on some baseball stuff in the background. Might knock out another draft. We're still doing that slow draft. Actually, let me check that real quick. We had a very, very slow draft, which at first I was saying, like, why are we starting this 25 days before opening day? And now I think we're going to need every minute of that. Let's see. We don't pick again for another 5 picks. Okay. Ah, damn it. Friedel went. Outman went. It's like an 8-keeper and then draft from there kind of a league. We're in the 6th round right now, into the 6th round. Might do another public league over the weekend, though. I've only done the one so far. Feel a little bit behind in terms of where I normally am with drafting public leagues, but I'll hit a stretch where I do 10 drafts in a week. I do like getting a little bit closer to the season too. The band Good Charlotte. That's not where I was going. I think I'll take some Charlotte Hornets, but you might be better off playing the band Good Charlotte than some of these Charlotte Hornets. I don't know. Not that Washington's all that threatening. Brandon Miller, I think, could definitely have a day up at the top of the board. Keep in mind, Terry Rozier's name is there, but he's on Miami now, so we're getting him out of the other game at the end of the night with the heavy total on it, but he's up at the top of the board as well. A lot of pieces coming out of that Charlotte and Washington game, though. EB's here. What's up, EB? Podigen's binge watching the Terran series and cannabis and snacks and NHL DFS. Got a lot going on out there. Trey's knocking down 100K tonight. I love it. Calling a shot. Sounds like a plan to me, man. Let me actually... I'm going to throw one lineup into that DraftKings tournament like I've been doing. Just a little lotto ticket. Just for the hell of it. Grab a placeholder there real quick. If it's still open, it is. Haven't been doing well with these little lotto tickets. It's difficult one lineup at a time. No way to really gauge success, but they haven't been succeeding. But that's okay. We press on. And yes. All right. Got a placeholder in there now. As long as I can remember to edit it later before the slate starts, we'll be in business. Yeah, that's it. Couple lotto tickets in a tournament like that. Probably the best way to approach it. All right, let's take a look at this slate. Start with the guards. So, Mr. LeVert dominating the top of the board. It is 1.02 points per minute on FanDuel, 1.03 per minute on DraftKings. Got him. Still no Donovan Mitchell. Still no Max Strus out there. Pieces and parts missing. We've got him at right about that current season production. It's actually at a point per minute on and change on the nose. He's popular. I think his ownership is completely justifiable. 58.5% win rate. It's just really solid at the price at 6,400 on FanDuel, shooting guard, small forward. On DraftKings, a 44% win rate, getting to him 58% of the time. 78% is very aggressive for Karis LeVert, especially on a day, I don't necessarily want a giant chunk of my lineups with 78% Karis LeVert, 71% Miller, 83% DeJounte Murray, and whoever it was that I mentioned before, Bruno Fernando, I think it was, in like the 80s. That is a lot of weight going to just a very few players. The good news is you're way, way ahead of the field on all those numbers, so you can trim those back a little bit and distribute your slate however you want. It's just a good indicator that guys like LeVert, guys like Brandon Miller are significant plays on the FanDuel slate today. They're both very, very good on DraftKings as well. Your ownership is closer to those win rates. Your ownership is closer to where the field is. What's up, Travis? Travis Wyndham walking in the door. Not a good game environment overall for Cleveland. Could work against Karis LeVert here. Could work against Darius Garland a little bit. Jared Allen a little bit. Two of the best defensive teams in the league, Minnesota and Cleveland, going up against one another there. A relatively low total at a very low total at 206 is just not the lowest on this slate, given that we've got Orlando and the Knicks. But a very low total at 206. So there is a lot to, throw in the face of a bunch of success coming out of Minnesota and Cleveland. I would pick my spots in this game, meaning I don't necessarily want to have a bunch of shares of a bunch of guys from that game in the same lineup. I'm fine with spreading out some shares, have some Karis LeVert here and have him be the primary guy. And then you take, assuming he goes, your Anthony Edwards shares. He looks pretty decent on DraftKings. You take your Garland shares. He looks a little better on FanDuel. But it's one where I kind of want to spread them out a little bit rather than piling everything from that game into one lineup. Just given the really low total, the defensive nature of both of those teams. Spread just moved toward Cleveland, and the total dropped. Ant's probably out, says Power. All right, that could create some havoc. That is... I'm saying it's the same. Same as I had it anyway. Probably just not caught up on that other site yet. Chat's been working late all week. Glad he can finally catch the live show. Yeah, glad you're here, buddy. Punching out early on Friday? Or I guess it's not that early. 4:48. Brandon Miller putting up a solid 0.87 per minute on the season, 0.89 over on DraftKings. On this slate, we've got him well over a point per minute in the 1.07, 1.08 territory. And he's been greatly improved since the start of the new year. He's been playing in that general territory, and I think we can expect a fair amount of offense out of this game. So I like having him a little bit juiced here. But since the start of the new year, just getting to that tab back on Wowie. Since the start of the new year, he's been at 0.94 per minute. That's on the FanDuel scale, of course. Since the start of February, we've been at 1.0 on the nose. So he's just been improving month over month. So I think, considering him somewhere between 0.95 and 1.0 in like a neutral game environment, given that they're picking up about 5 possessions and a good amount of pace in this game, I like the spot for Brandon Miller. I think there's a lot of room for him to succeed. Miles Bridges also looks, equally good, but he's at a higher price tier and just kind of is who he is type of a spot where I think there's a little bit of advantage on getting to some Brandon Miller. And then Micic obviously is driving a lot on both sites. So Miller checked in 71% of the top 150 on FanDuel, 37.9% win rate. On DraftKings, he was in 59% of the top 150 and a 43% win rate. 7,000 on both sites. We're getting a little bit more of them on FanDuel, but his win rate's actually a little bit better on DraftKings. Micic at 53% exposure against a 38.9% win rate on FanDuel. 38.6% exposure against a 27% win rate on DraftKings. Got him at 30 minutes right now. I think if we don't get Trey Mann, who's down here, right now I'm just assuming they're playing alongside one another. But if Trey Mann goes out, then I do think that there's a little bit of additional minutes. Micic probably jumps into the mid-30s. I think you could justify getting him around there right now. And then we'll have some downstream impact as well, obviously, because you can't pile all of Trey Mann's 30 minutes into that spot. Yeah, Misic is gone. 29 last game. 36, 2 games back, 28, and then into the teens. But the 36 obviously is encouraging for additional run. There's no Seth Curry. There's no Cody Martin. There might be no Trey Mann. A lot of opportunity for success there. At 5,400 too, 0.77 per minute on the season. Got him in the range a little bit above what he's been over the last, since the start of February. 335 minutes, 674 possessions. He's been in the 0.93 territory. And that's not making the adjustments in just what I'm looking at here on Wowie for a couple of those absences. But just suffice to say, 0.9 plus, giving him a little bump for the game environment, the opponent, and all of that. I think 0.98 is about right. DeJounte Murray continuing to play in the no Trey environment. Another significant offensive piece coming out with no Jalen Johnson. A lot of upside for Atlanta going up against a low-end Memphis team that is, held together with sticks and chewing gum at this point. Most of their quality NBA players are not going to be there. Triple J, Vince Williams, Santi Aldama, presumably Jordan Goodwin, who scratched. That was really annoying their last game. Jordan Goodwin not on the injury report all day. He's on a two-way. So assuming that he was going to play with their various missing bodies, and then it was post-lock. I think it was the 7:30 injury report. All of a sudden they dropped him onto the injury report and he just wasn't playing. Not what you like to see and how you like to see these teams handle their business. But yeah, they've just been low end and gettable. And DeJounte Murray with no Trae Young, there's plenty of upside there. Got him just under 50 points for the night. He's pulling down an 83.3% exposure in the top 150 on FanDuel, 37.3% for 9,200 under DraftKings slate. He's more expensive and he has no positional flex on DraftKings. That's part of why you're getting more of them on FanDuel. 8,900 shooting guard and point guard over there. 1.11 with 25% usage for the season, and that improves with no Trae. Mamba says, see, I think most people are complaining about that one the other way, Mamba. What's the deal with people expecting 40 minutes and then guys don't play? Mamba's saying, what's the deal with guys being questionable and playing 40 minutes? It's disgusting. I didn't play Jaylen Brown as a last man yesterday because he was questionable all day. Then he plays 40 minutes with a gazillion shots. Yeah, it's definitely frustrating how they handle injuries and everything in the NBA. I don't have a good solution for it. You like to think that some kind of requirement for honesty would be an easy way to do it, but how do you enforce that? How do you say, oh, well, you knew that his knee didn't hurt that much and that he was going to play versus, hey, his knee legitimately hurts and he's a game time decision. It's very, very difficult to police. I think they could just stick in an artificial, you have to let us know and make it, an hour sooner before game time or something just to ease the burden for sports books. And I've said it before, with how much they partner with sports books, with how much they partner with DFS sites, you would think that some of this stuff is coming. But maybe they like it. Maybe it keeps the variability out there for the books. So who knows? But yeah, for us, it's really, really annoying. I'm with you. Jordan Poole. Let's talk Jordan Poole. He's the highest owned player on the DraftKings slate in the projections anyway. I don't like that. The Sims don't seem to really like that either, which is the good news. At 6,000 point guard, shooting guard, you could say he's up there. He's one of the higher end guards. But we're only getting him 9.3% of the time in the top 150. That's against a 26.3% win rate. That's because his ownership is higher than that win rate by a handful of percentage points. I'm happy to go the other way with Jordan Poole pretty much any time he gets popular. Even with a desire to get to that game, with an appealing game environment there, a lot of pieces coming out of it, that's one of the guys I'm more content to let the field have. Across 150 lineups, absolutely. You have them 10% of the time, you're fine. You can get them out to 25%. If you're comfy just being with the field on a guy like Jordan Poole, then you've got it right there. You can go out to 26-ish, 25, 26%. That would still leave you a few points below the field, but the Sims are seeing it a different way. The Sims are coming up pretty aggressively anti Jordan Poole or get well under on Jordan Poole. Same thing on FanDuel, 21% win rate, just a 6% share in the top 150. 0.93 per minute on the season. There is plenty of usage. He's got plenty of opportunity. Just has not been good on the overall. Did put up 35 in 32 minutes the other night. Has point per minute upside, point per minute ability any given night. Not a difficult opponent. Just don't love it. Christopher says, hey, do your show earlier. Hate missing it, but I pay for ETR, so I watch it at 4. Noted. It's difficult. It's especially for NBA. Like baseball shows, I like to do a little earlier because there's less breaking news. NBA shows, like you do a show at 2:30, 2 o'clock, and it's irrelevant by the time we get to 5. So it's just difficult. Yeah, slow-mo. Slow-mo murdered our lineups the other day. I'm with you, Trav. I had him. Big Bino, do you have have you clicked the little subscribe bell down there? Should tell you when we go live. If you've got the notifications on for YouTube. I also send it out on the @rotoscouts Twitter handle whenever we're going live, and I drop it in the Discord as well. Chris, the other solution is we could start making it so that you pay here, and then you'd be more inclined to watch here. One of these days. We'll get around to tacking on a minor fee. Gotta make some money out of this thing somehow at some point. Anyway, that's a future problem. Where were we? So Jordan Poole, yeah, I'm good with leaving some Jordan Poole to the public there. Josh Giddey looks really good on the DraftKings slate. Got to him a little bit ahead of that win rate. 25% winner, 30% of the top 150 for 5,100. Not bad. Put up 34.7 in 32 minutes on the FanDuel scale the other night. Got him at 28. That seems to be the comfy range, but he does have games where he's trending up into the 30s. So I think there's ceiling there. On FanDuel, we didn't get a ton of them because he's 6,900. Point guard, shooting guard is a good positional flex. We got a little, but only 6% against a 21% win rate. Imagine that just means he's more popular over on FanDuel. Actually, no. Wow. That's surprising. He's not at all popular. He's more popular on DraftKings. That's interesting. We're like right in line with the... sorry. Nope, that's Jordan Poole. We're well over the field on the DraftKings slate. We're like 3x on DraftKings, which I like. On FanDuel, we're also like 3x, but it's at 4.6%. Just not coming up very much on the FanDuel slate. 7.5% win rate. I get it. Just appropriately priced at 6,300 versus 5,100 across town. I think I read the wrong prices. I think I was looking at Jordan Poole's line before. So, yeah, I think Josh Giddey, playable on FanDuel, looks very, very good on DraftKings. Ingram just looks like an is who he is spot for Brandon Ingram across the board, unless something has changed down there. Like, remember I said at the top of the show that Zion ownership jumped. Let me make sure nothing's changed. Saturday. All this is Saturday news. So Ingram, just a solid play. 8,000 both forward spots on FanDuel, 79 shooting guard, small forward on DraftKings. Comes up a fair amount of the time, aggressively so on the DraftKings slate, 17.8% of the time in winners and 42% of the time in the top 150. That's pretty good exposure to a fairly high-end player from the mid-range, right? He's not a star, but he's certainly not a value play. He's an upper middle class type. 1.17 points per minute on the season, giving you 5.19 points per dollar today. Pretty solid. At 8,000 on FanDuel, you're at 4.94 points per dollar. He lands in 23% of the top 150 at a 16.4% win rate. Obviously, this was a disaster at that price. But we're typically not getting just 25 minutes. We're typically not getting just 22 fantasy points out of him. It's a lot more upside there than that. Bogdan, serviceable. 17% exposure on FanDuel, 16% exposure on DraftKings. Just looks like he's correctly priced for this type of a situation. Playing minutes into the low mid 30s, around his typical season-long usage and season-long production. Put up 35 and 33.7 minutes the other night. Just a solid play from the middle. Not like a massive track toward a huge ceiling, but capable of getting to a ceiling on any given slate. Capable of paying off that mid-range price from the more appealing side of that Atlanta-Memphis game. I do think it makes some sense to get to some Bogdan, but it's not a high priority play. He's just a good mixer in the middle with a lot of 20+% win rate on FanDuel, 17% on DraftKings. So there's a lot of quality there. If it's not like burning up the priority list, it's just a good quality play out of the middle. Koulibaly, 4,400 small forward on FanDuel, 4,300 shooting guard small forward on DraftKings. About the same across the board. 13.4% winner on FanDuel, 12% of the top 150, 10% of the top 150 on DraftKings, 14.8% winner. Easily playable, 0.70 DraftKings points per minute, 0.71 FanDuel points per minute, and low usage. You're obviously going to hear me say that he comes with an asterisk. Anytime we get guys like that, you're in danger of putting a game like this into your lineup. 28 minutes the other night, put up 19 FanDuel points. Even at 4,400, that's not enough. Do have an upside supported by some minutes, some expectation of a healthy scoring environment, some bad players, where a few additional balls can fall into his hands on off the glass. He's owned just into this range. On FanDuel, he's owned probably similarly on DraftKings. Yeah, we're right around the field on both sites on Koulibaly. I think that's reasonable enough. There's no real explosive upside here. It's just an okay price play. 4,300 is workable on DraftKings. 4,400 on FanDuel, just workable. 5.3 points per dollar, 5.24 points per dollar. I just, I hit the brakes on it a little bit, just again because of the low usage, the low per minute numbers on the average this season, and I don't know how much ceiling there necessarily is beyond 28-ish fantasy points, somewhere in that range. How many times are we getting into the 30s? I don't know how many times we're getting a point per minute out of them. Let's see where we're at. As I'm saying that, 0.74 for tonight. He's been since the start of February, he's been at 0.59, but that's not accounting for no Bagley. There's still 92 Gafford minutes in there. I think he's right in line with this. These are very playable numbers, non-priority, but a piece to keep in mind from that game for a fairly low price. If you're just fishing around for, all right, I've got that spot open and I don't have that much money, who can I plug in there that has a little bit of upside, at least into the mid-20s, upper 20s. It's just you're not getting 35, 40 out of him. He's not going to win you a slate. He could be a piece in a lineup that does win a slate. It's going to be the very rare occasion that Koulibaly is going to go out there and win you the slate. Anthony Edwards, we're keeping an eye on. Haven't seen any news yet, but we were talking about just before the line movement in that game might be suggestive that he's not going to go. Still questionable as of right now. One of the bigger pieces of news that we're waiting on this slate. Definitely looks playable. It's just, I, again, don't love that game environment. Got him at just 1.16 tonight. It's against a, where is he for the season? 1.22 for the season. Obviously one of the highest end usage players on the slate. One of the higher end usage players on the slate. I get distracted working on mentally transitioning to talk about his last game, where he put up a monster 67.7 and 38.6 minutes the other night, and if you didn't have that one the other night, it was bye-bye to the top of the standings. So very, very capable of coming out and putting down a ceiling game. You just need him to play. 9,800, the price is high. The price, he's priced for this kind of trajectory. 44 FanDuel points as a median projection, 45 on DraftKings for 9,000. 5.4% winner on FanDuel, 4% of your top 150. Got to him a little bit better on DraftKings. He hit 14.2% of the time in winners. We only took 6% of them in our top 150. I'm going to guess that's below the field. It's about half the field. I think there's plenty of room to go out to 15% on Anthony Edwards if you want to, given the win rate. You just need him out there. But again, I am shaving down his per minute number for tonight, just given Cleveland's defensive acumen. So there's good, there's bad in the Minnesota-Cleveland game, and that's going to be the case for all of these guys on both sides from that game. Tyus Jones looking pretty playable. 10% basically on FanDuel. 13.4% winner on DraftKings, 8.6% of the time. I'm guessing that's about with or just below the field. And how is he? Yeah, he's in that general territory. We're a little bit below the field on both sites, but we're talking about, percentage point or two. His projected public ownership is like right in line with these win rates on both sites. I have no real issues going out to about the public's lower mid-teens type ownership on Tyus Jones. I think there's enough upside there. 1.01 per minute on the season, 16% usage, but obviously, a prime facilitator in that lineup. Put up just 20 FanDuel points in 27 minutes the other night, but there's security of minutes there. I think there's enough fairly priced potential. Jordan Goodwin, I mentioned it before. I just don't know that he's for sure going to be out there. I would have to think he is, just given the shortage of bodies. Assuming that Kennard doesn't play, he's doubtful. And then especially if there's also no G.G. Jackson, like they just need bodies. I don't love him on either site. I definitely don't want him at 6,200 on FanDuel. 2.2% winner, 0.67% of the top 150. There's just no need to go there. On DraftKings, he's 1,000 less, 5,200 point guard and shooting guard eligible. It gives him a little bit more to work with. He's got a 13.2% win rate over there, but just 6% of the top 150. He's another guy I don't really mind forgoing that many, the Jordan Goodwin shares. Definitely not a priority. If the public's getting there, I think it's one that you can give back to the public fairly easily. In the projections right now, he's owned ahead of our ownership there. Whoops. He's at less than double, but a handful of percentage points on top of our top 150 exposure. A little bit under the win rate, though. So there is, if you like the Jordan Goodwin play, if you think you're going to get additional run, like if we end up getting him to 33, 34 minutes, somewhere in that territory, or 30, 31, 32 even, it changes it a little bit. It changes my enthusiasm a little bit. The win rate goes up. I think the justification to get some more shares in your top 150 exposure goes up. Wouldn't necessarily have that same impact on FanDuel. He's just too high priced on the FanDuel slate. SGA, very good pay up option at 11,000. 10% winner, 6% of your top 150. I have no issues if you want more than that of SGA on basically any given slate. And it's the same story on DraftKings. 11.7% winner, just 2% of the top 150. That is below the public exposure. I'm going to say on both sites. Yeah, below public exposure on both sites. If you want to go out to the public in the mid-teens type range, no issues. I don't know that I would extend out into the 20s, just given how high priced he is compared to a lot of the rest of the slate. But obviously one of the guys with the best upside on the slate, one of the guys with the highest ceiling. I think he's the highest raw projected player on the slate today. Indeed he is. He's actually the only guy I have projected in the 50s on either side. So there's that. He's also the only guy. Is he the only guy over 10,000 on either side? He is. So that's your trade-off with SGA. That's why I don't necessarily think you go into the 20s if you wanted to go out to like the public ownership. But that is what the sim ownership is indicating with being this far below the public and undercutting the win rate, is that price tag has a downstream impact in your lineup. It does impact the number of times you're getting lineups into the top 150. It does impact the number of times you're getting lineups to the winners. So a little bit to think about in terms of like the ROI at that price on SGA. Obviously, if he runs off and hides with like an 80-point game, you're going to wish you had him. So total justification to have him in the 5 to 10% range. If you want to extend out to the mid-teens, I think you're okay. The further beyond the mid-teens you go, the more I think that price might get you in a little bit of trouble. Chris saying, still love to see that best ball content. I was thinking about that the other night again, just how I could manage to do that. I'd sub for best ball content. I'd like to. I really would. Just, yeah. For something that I don't play myself, I always have difficulty jumping into saying like, yeah, follow me, pay me money for this when I don't play basketball. Makes it difficult. I should ping Neil. Neil's the best ball guy. Power thinking the Pelly's starters will be on the bench by the fourth quarter. Mamba doesn't necessarily agree. Mamba looking for Point Zion to put up 60 today. All right. I think the Pelly's game is the most important on the slate. Interesting. There are definitely parts from that game. Siege is here. Ingram's up there. I know Zion. We're sorted to guards. That's why I don't see Zion. I was like, I know Zion's on here somewhere. Some of the Philly side should be coming through. Alvarado's here. Buddy Hield's there. I know, there's Kyle Lowry. There are definitely some pieces from that game. There's Oubre. I knew he was in here somewhere. What is that? That's 222 point total. The 7.5 point spread is the second biggest on the slate, but the 222 point total is the third biggest on the slate. So there's appeal in that. There's appeal in having some right-priced mid-types like a Kelly Oubre at 68 with positional flex on FanDuel, 62 with positional flex on DraftKings. But you can see with Oubre, despite a 12.4% win rate, he just came up 2.6% of the time in the top 150. 6% win rate just came up a few times in the top 150 on the DraftKings slate. So it's a spot where the public's just kind of there appropriately. Looks like maybe a little room on Siege. More so on DraftKings. 22% exposure in the top 150 against a 10% win rate. 15% against a 10% on FanDuel. Let's see. We talked through these guys. We were on... I don't want to just go man by man through every single guard on here, but we've had some relevant plays to talk about through those top 15 guys. Garland just kind of priced for is who he is. I mentioned it the other day, when we were looking at the numbers when Mitchell first hit the injury list, and then Karis LeVert was out and questionable a couple of games. We saw this spike in in Darius Garland's per minute numbers, but he just hasn't really gotten there in these situations much for us. 32 minutes the other night, 24.7 FanDuel points. I think there's justification for knowing who the player is over time in this situation for continuing to at least eyeball the spot and have it project fairly well. But right now, he's just been delivering around his sub 1 per minute numbers that he's put up this season. And they're going up against a good defensive team in Minnesota with a low total in that game. Again, a very defensively oriented game. 14% with 12% exposure in the top 150 on FanDuel. I think that makes sense. I don't think I want him all that much more than that, despite kind of liking the player. At 76 on DraftKings, we got to him about an 11.3% win rate, but just 2.6% of the time in the top 150. Gotta say that the field is ahead of that. Yeah, field is well ahead of that. So Sims are saying an undercut by about 4x on Darius Garland. Just not a healthy game environment. Has not been great, even with the absences there. Just, where he typically picks that torch up, he just really hasn't for them for whatever reason in these last handful of games. So it's not to say that he can't immediately go out there and put up the, 1.19, I want to say. That was with no Mitchell and no LeVert. but call it 1-1. Any kind of improvement over the 0.96. Just hasn't really shown it to us yet. CJ, I was just talking about CJ McCollum, does look playable on both sites. We're ahead of the win rate on both sites in our top 150 exposure. Looks better at 6,800 on DraftKings versus 7,400 on FanDuel. No positional flex on DraftKings, but hardly matters. Dunk Robinson, if you're looking for pieces at reasonable prices out of that Miami OKC game, 5,600 positional flex on FanDuel. Mid-teens exposure, mid-teens win rate. On DraftKings, a little bit less, 5,500. Shooting guard and small forward, just a 10.4, and we got to him less than that. Field is field's not really there. We're slightly ahead of the field with room to spare. If you wanted to take Dunk out to like 10% on DraftKings, you're fine. On FanDuel, we're similar kind of territory. I have no issues having Dunk right here on FanDuel. And I think you could go up to this 10% on DraftKings if you want it. 5%, 6%, 8%, somewhere in that territory is perfectly fine as well. I would cap it at like 10. It's an okay option. He's one that I've talked about a bunch of times where I never get too enthusiastic about him. He does have his ability for a decent mid-range ceiling type game. High 30s into the 40 territory. He is a 0.92 per minute, 0.94 per minute on DraftKings player. Skip down again. It was Trey Mann. 0.79, 0.84 per minute player. I knew that didn't sound right. 30 minutes the other night, put up 25 FanDuel points. Good shooter, but when those shots don't fall, it becomes problematic. Taking 6.9 threes a game, making 41% of them, 62.3% true shooting for the season. An okay assist rate. Not a great assist rate, but an okay one to support a little bit of additional upside. But really a guy who does have to knock down his shots and has to have the opportunity to take them. And on typical nights, just around league average usage. So never my favorite play, but he's correctly priced for being that kind of a guy. Trey Mann, if he's out there, definitely playable on FanDuel. As I said just a second ago, mistakenly, 0.92 on FanDuel, 0.94 on DraftKings. We didn't really get him at all on DraftKings, just 2% against a 9.8% win rate. He's a mixer over there. On FanDuel, we got to him 8% of the time against 11%. I would call that a mixer as well, and it feels like we're probably a little below the field. Yeah, that's cutting the field about in half on FanDuel. I think it's just because of where they've got him priced now. I was getting decent shares of Trey Mann at first, but that price has come up kind of commensurate with the performance. 35 FanDuel points in 34 minutes the other night. I think he's playable from this number, and the Sims are obviously showing that, but I don't know that I want to get like double what this exposure is, which is about where the field is at, and especially if he doesn't play. Oubre, I mentioned I like out of the Philly side there, but again, we are well below the win rates and below the field. Vince Williams should have plenty to do. 7,200 small forward shooting guard looks pretty decent on FanDuel at an 18.6% win rate, but probably a little popular given how we're undercutting the field. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is low. We're like a sixth of the field's exposure. The field's popularity is ahead of that win rate. I can make a reasonable argument that there would be a little bit of additional ceiling, but I think it would push me to like, maybe take the 4% out to like 15%, somewhere in that territory. I don't think I want to go into the 20s with him, and the field looks like they're in like the mid-20s on FanDuel. On DraftKings, we didn't get him at all against a 5.6% win rate with a $6,900 price tag. He's popular over there too. That's one of the bigger undercuts in our sim. Interesting. I don't dislike the player. I don't dislike getting to some pieces from Memphis. Um, like I was saying, if you wanted to go like more in line with the win rate, maybe a couple points below on DraftKings, that's more difficult to say because it's just a 5% win rate. And he's owned like 3 times that ish. I think there's justification to have some, but given the popularity, given what's coming through in these sims right now, yeah, not a lot. Looks like one of the better undercuts for the day. If you get this and you've undercut him, you're not necessarily shot in the foot because he's, he's priced in the middle. It's not like he's an extreme value anymore. 6,900 on DraftKings, 72 on FanDuel. That's not a ceiling score. That 44.9 that he put up in the last game, not at 7,200. It's a good score. It's not going to kill your lineup, but it's also not going to necessarily kill you if you don't have it. You get that kind of a game from a guy priced like this, that's a totally different story. Jose Alvarado looks not really all that playable on the FanDuel slate. We got to him 1% of the time at a 5% win rate on DraftKings. Doesn't look like a high priority play. Buddy Hield out of the New Orleans Philly game, or also out of that game because I was just talking about Alvarado. Looks a little bit better, 5%, 6% across the sites. Didn't get to him all that much on DraftKings, where we got to him 6% of the time on FanDuel. I do think he looks just fairly playable, though. Is who he is, kind of a night for Buddy, which is never all that comfortable, honestly. Jalen Brunson, if he's out there, moderately playable. I cut him. It's weird saying I cut his minutes down when I've got him at 36 minutes. But Jalen plays a whole hell of a lot of minutes and had been playing aggressive high minutes. 35.4 for the season. So this is in line with like his season long average. But had been playing more in the like 38 territory. But since he's banged up, since he's questionable right now, I figured it made sense to shave it down a little bit. 6.8% winner, got to him 3% of the time on FanDuel. 4.6% winner, didn't really get to him at all on DraftKings. And then similar for DiVincenzo, he's got his full complement of minutes, but at 7,600 shooting guard and small forward, he does have a 14% win rate on the blue site, but only 4.6% exposure. And then on DraftKings, just under a 4% win rate and didn't really come up at all relevant at 7,800, more expensive site to site on DraftKings. So Devo playable on FanDuel, but not a priority. What's his public ownership, though? He's not popular over there. He's owned a little bit more than that top 150 exposure on FanDuel, but nowhere near that win rate. So if you wanted to grab a few additional shares of him, especially if you get a situation where Jalen's not there, doesn't necessarily help their offensive sets and their distribution of the ball and their facilitation to not have Jalen there. DiVincenzo's game, a lot of his offense comes from shooting threes. So, just having their primary facilitator, ball handler, point guard there does actually help him get the ball in his hands and get those shots off. But the idea that he might have to just create more offense, take more shots if Jalen's not there, could float the upside a little bit. So there's a little bit of give and take around Jalen as far as DiVincenzo's value goes, but I do think you could get a little bit more than the 4 or 5% of them if you want, given where that win rate is on FanDuel. At 78 on DraftKings, I don't think he's a priority at all. Barely playable, honestly. Mike Conley, he's all right out of the mid-range there. 1.3% ownership against the 7.6% success rate. I would have to look what his usage and everything looks like if there's no Edwards. That's not one that I explored. Obviously, Conley does other things, gets his fantasy points without shooting the ball that much, 14.7% usage. But he's had a lot of these. He's been priced fairly in just like the 5s for most of the season. So we've been seeing him a fair amount of the time in sim results. It's just he floats through the middle pretty consistently. You can get there with him, but there's a lot of these in the mix as well. 0.90 for the season. Another old point guard, Kyle Lowry, 21.5% winner, 18% of the top 150 on FanDuel coming out of the Philly side of that game. 5,100, pretty okay price for him. There's been a lot more low end than the Kyle Lowry we used to know, but reasonable expectation with all the missing bodies in Philly and just with, 30 plus minutes of Kyle Lowry at that price. I think there's a little bit of juice there. On the DraftKings side of things, 5,700, there's nothing at all for him. 1.5% win rate, didn't get him at all in the top 150. That's too high a price against DraftKings cap. Last differentiated guy down here, Jalen Suggs, 7.3% winner, 5% of the top 150. Playable, non-priority. What are you guys talking about? Not a lot of chatter going on. You guys are quiet today. Let's jump over to forwards. A lot of the same names because everybody's got multi-position. Levert, Brendan Miller, Kispert we haven't talked about yet. 0.82 per minute on FanDuel, 0.87 on DraftKings. We got to him 24% of the time against a 27.3% win rate on the DraftKings slate. On FanDuel, 12% across the board at 4,700. The positional flex and the low cost on DraftKings is kind of interesting. Where's my other spreadsheet here? Come on. We're in the 0.85 range for him today. So we're not giving him all that much on top of his normal production. 0.03 of a fantasy point. I think he can handle it. Put up just 13.2 in 19 minutes the other night. That's obviously a disaster even at 4,700, 4,400. We've got no Landry Shamet there tonight, in addition to the other pieces that have been missing. So a little bit of expectation for him. That's what's part of what's creating a little bit of additional upside for Jordan Poole. The usual suspects from Washington, Kyle Kuzma, Denny Avdia, Tyus Jones, we talked about. Jordan Poole, we talked about. Bilal Coulibaly, we talked about. But my two favorite options are Kuzma and Denny in terms of just actually good players. Here's Kuz. 4% across the board on FanDuel. Looks a lot better on DraftKings. 7,800 power forward and center. Got to him 19% in winners, 21% in the top 150. And then Denny's right here. Denny looks a whole lot better on FanDuel than he does on DraftKings. Looks very good on DraftKings. 18.3% winner, 30% of the top 150 for 6,700 on DK. But we got to him nearly 50% of the time on FanDuel against a 41% win rate. Another just aggressively popular guy in our FanDuel sims. When we pull up those FanDuel lineups, we're going to see a lot of just block commonality through those top-end lineups, given some of these aggressively high numbers. And then it's a matter of just rotating the right pieces through the $8,200 Zion versus $8,500 Kuzma types, $8,400 Miles Bridges types. That's actually a direct comparison, direct one-to-one that was coming up for me earlier. Travis Duarte likes Avdia. Yeah, Danny put up, 32.9 in 35.6 minutes the other night. He's been at 1.01 overall for the season. For tonight, I've got him right at that number, 1.01. Kuzma, I've got at 1.15, right in line with his. He put up a 42 in 31.4 minutes the other night. 29.8% usage for him for the season. And we've seen some pretty decent upside games from Kuzma over the course of the entire season, if you think back. Could be an okay spot for him. He's popular, but he's not crazy popular. On FanDuel, he's just priced to the point where he doesn't come up as a high priority option, but at 78 on DraftKings with power forward and center eligibility, that does make Kuzma interesting over there. Tobias has to be on this board somewhere, Mamba. There he is. All the way down here. Looks a little better on FanDuel. 7,700, just 2.7% winner, 3.3% of the top 150 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, got to him in winners 10% of the time, but only 6% in the top 150 lineups. I think in like a basketball situation sense, as I talked about him kind of the other day. He looks better than he does DFS value-wise, if that makes sense. Right? Like, logically, Tobias being probably the best player on Philly right now has a reasonable track toward the most upside, has a reasonable track toward the highest ceiling game. He's projected that way. He's projected into the mid-30s. But overall for the course of the season, we're talking about a guy who's been sub 1.97. I've got him at 0.99 tonight. There's really no possessions uptick in that game. Going up against a pretty decent New Orleans team in terms of defensive upside. So I don't love the spot for Tobias, just given how he's bouncing off the Sims at price. I can make, without the sim numbers, I would have probably had a stronger preference for Tobias, because I don't think he's priced wrong, given the expectation here. It's just, he's probably correct. He's not popular, and we've seen him hit some upside games as well in this role and in this type of a situation. Nick Batum's still questionable, so potentially another body out of the mix there. I think there's maybe a little bit of hidden upside on Tobias. Just a little bit of the hidden situational upside. The any given slate in this situation upside for Tobias that's not necessarily reflected through the Sims. And the good news is for that, he is very low owned by the public. So if you wanted to take a few additional speculative shares of Tobias, just saying hey, it feels right. It makes sense that he's got more upside than we're necessarily mathing out to today. I think his ownership is low enough that you're not really going to hurt yourself. On FanDuel, he's right in this territory anyway. So I probably wouldn't go much beyond this. On DraftKings, it's also right in this territory, but that's low enough where if you wanted to say, hey, I'm going to double, triple the field, you're still sub 10%. So it's not taking a huge stake. And it is a player that does have a reasonable path to some upside. So it's a yes and a no. As annoying as that is to get from a person here to give you DFS advice. A tout, so to speak. I always hated that word. Dean Wade put up 13.8 at high ownership in 30 minutes the other night in Cleveland. Doesn't look all that appealing tonight on FanDuel. He's 4,300 power forward only over there. Only coming up 4% of the time in the top 150, sub 10% in winners. At 38 on DraftKings with power forward and center eligibility, though. He's part of the problem. 16.4% winner, 23% of the top 150. Just a good price-driven value option there. Assuming we're getting back in the starting lineup, getting a reasonable expectation of minutes. It's there. He could easily disappoint. We're talking about a guy with one of the lowest usage rates. That's probably the lowest usage rate for anybody actually getting time on this entire slate at just 10%. He's been a 0.72 per minute guy on DraftKings, 0.73 on FanDuel. Nobody's idea of a good option. And they're going up against a good defensive team. I have no issues leaving a little bit of Dean Wade on the table. It's just a functional price, just a building block. And as a building block, it came up pretty decently. You do need him to deliver a little bit more than what he did the other day, a little bit of that ceiling. The good news is that ownership is way... Oh, wait. Nope, that's difficult juggling these tabs. The good news is that ownership is well above the field. If you cut this in half, I think you'd probably be about where you want to be on Dean Wade. That's a little bit aggressive for my tastes on such a low-end per-minute performer, even with some time and some expectation, and even at a very, very good price. If you cut that in half, you're still well ahead of the field. You're still about double the field. Gives you some room there. It's just a little bit of his low end and then the game environment. Makes that one a little bit shakier, I think, than maybe it looks. Oh, glad I hit that good. Hit that well for what you wanted to do, Mom. It's always nice when that works out, right? I want it to go this way. I'm hoping that this is his answer, and then it's just yes, just the reinforcement of what you had already. Trey Mann out, so Misic goes up. He was already looking great. That's just going to improve that spot significantly. Jalen Suggs is out. All right. That's an interesting one. Let me look at that real quick. So 28 minutes drop into the pool there. We've obviously got the easy minutes that'll drop to Cole Anthony, Markelle Fultz. And then I would suspect that they'll probably do one of those things that they did the other day where it was just Anthony Black expected to play more minutes, have a bigger role. Went out and played 22 the other night after that they made that announcement. I've got him just at 6 coming in, so I'll probably just land some of those minutes there. Any word on Wendell in that game? I can easily just check that. Wendell Carter Jr. available to play. All right, so Wendell in, Suggs out, and Trey Mann out. Let me pop those on the site real quick. Available, Suggs is out. Trey Mann is out. And 536. Just popping the note up on the website real quick here, gang. If you're somehow not familiar, rotoscouts.com. All the projections are up there for free right now. Follow at Rotoscouts on Twitter. That's where you can get all our announcements and links and so on and so forth. Hit the like button here on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. And you may or may not get notifications, apparently. Hop into the Discord if you haven't already. All those good things. Like to be highly available for everybody, especially coming into baseball season. Can't wait. Can't wait. I'm done with basketball. I got to tell you. I am ground down on the basketball season. So it's one of the reasons I've been just, sticking in lineups here and there and, playing light. Just looking forward to baseball coming back. Baseball's as much, if not more, of a grind, but I just love it. I don't know what it is. Let's see. Who have we not talked about? Caleb Martin. Reasonably good piece out of the Miami OKC game. 9.8% winner on FanDuel. 8% of the top 150 for 5,200, both forward spots. On DraftKings at 45, he's power forward only. The lack of flexibility kind of sucks. You'd like to be able to move him around the board. You've obviously got a few, wild card spots on DK. But he came up nearly a 15% winner, 13% of the top 150. Looks like a very functional part at price on DraftKings today. Koulibaly, we talked about a little bit at guard, but again, looks easily playable at worst. DeAndre Hunter, with an expectation of about 30 minutes, 5.2% winner on FanDuel, 2.6% of the top 150. On DraftKings, got to him just about half the win rate. Win rate at 14.5, got to him at 6.6% of the top 150. At 5,000, I think there's a little bit of ceiling on that one. Where's he? Yeah, I figured. He's pulling a little bit more public popularity than we're getting to him. Public popularity is out ahead of that win rate. But I do think there's a little bit, maybe, of upside that might lead it to 10%, like just a few more shares. I just think it's a good price for a decent player with plenty of opportunity ahead of him today. And since it's not a ton of Atlanta guys crashing the top of the board, I guess Sadiq Bey is up here. I skipped over him. I don't know that I would grab those Hunter shares and pile them on top of Sadiq Bey. Let's put it that way. But as a reasonable alternative, I think that makes sense. 5,000 less. Sadiq Bey at 5,700, we were getting to 21% of the time, 26.8% win rate. Bay's been at 0.81. I'm just reading a pop-up note there. Bay's been at 0.81 per minute on DraftKings, 0.79 on FanDuel. Went out and played 40 minutes the other night, put up 36.6. On the FanDuel slate, he really didn't come up that much, almost a 22% win rate, but just got him 6% of the time. Because he is a popular guy over there. So that's another pretty big undercut spot. Sadiq Bey on FanDuel. At 6,300, I guess it's the price, just bouncing off some of these better values at those positions. His popularity is higher than the win rate. I do think you could, again, it's another spot where if you wanted to grab additional shares, take it up 10, 12%. The win rate supports that. You're just approaching, public constructions. But there's a little bit of room there. One of the more overall popular value plays of the day from the $4,300 price tier on FanDuel, $4,200 price tier on DraftKings, Davis Bertans, 26.4% winner on FanDuel, got to him 30% of the time. On DraftKings, 25.9%, got to him 41% of the time. That was with 25 minutes. I think there's probably, I might throw him a couple additional minutes depending on how things reconfigure. But with Trey Mann out, Figure Misic running the show, that just leaves some minutes to spread around, and they're missing some of the rest of their backcourt. Yeah, no Seth, no Cody Martin. Am I going to have to give some time to, Bryce McGowan's? I already had him at 16. Am I going to have to go higher than that? Ugh. No Poku, no Nick Smith, no Seth Curry, no Cody Martin, no LaMelo, no Mark Williams. Running out of names on this team. Yeah, I guess just these down bench guys. So yeah, probably a couple additional minutes there. So if anything, I think the Davis Bertans play gets even better. He was already 5.6 points per dollar on FanDuel, 5.9 points per dollar on DraftKings. It's not a direct positional fill-in, obviously. But it's just a handful more minutes for a capable guy that they're going to have some minutes out there. And they've got a guy who can, obviously run the point for the entire game. I think it might end up that way. And then just, trickle down minutes for everybody else. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a direct positional switch. So I do think there's a little bit of additional upside there. Miles Bridges, obviously, he's already at 38 minutes. 8,400, the prime player from that group. 26% winner, 26% of the top 150 on FanDuel. 18% winner, 20% of the top 150 on DraftKings. Plenty of reason to expect that Miles Bridges is going to have a ton to do today. That said, with a ton to do the other day, in 36 minutes, he put up 18 FanDuel points. About half his usual rate. Half a point per minute. That was not a good one. That's a total disaster. If you get that, your lineups are dead. But he does look pretty good and very playable today. Jimmy Butler, 20s across the board on FanDuel, basically the same spot on DK. 8,200, just a pretty good price for a guy like Jimmy Butler. 1.15 per minute on the season. That's been improved over the last 2 months. On FanDuel, he's at 8,800 with eligibility at both forward spots. Again, just a good price, 1.15 per minute on the season, but definitely upside. What's his... Since the start of February, Jimmy's been at 1.3 FanDuel, 1.31 FanDuel, 1.30 DraftKings over the past month and change. Obviously, they're going up against a good OKC team. Got him at... Come on, just click on the right square. There we go. I got him at just 1.19. So I gave him a little bit more than the season long, but obviously a pretty good slice less than what he's been over the last month and change. I think we're zeroed in at a pretty decent spot for Jimmy here. And he looks good. He looks playable. Not the top priority play, but among the quasi-stars, which is probably unfair to label Jimmy that way. He's pretty much a star NBA-wise, but DFS-wise, he's more that quasi-star. Does look pretty appealing from that group. And he's priced similarly to Miles Bridges, priced similarly to Brandon Ingram, less than Anthony Edwards, similarly to Zion. Can't tell me there's no upside for Jimmy there. I like that. I like that spot. Ingram, Danny, we've talked about. Dean Wade, Caleb Martin, Koulibaly, we've talked about. Hunter, Edwards. Covered most of these guys. Zion, like I said, that Zion ownership did spike. Maybe it was just a weird little thing, and maybe it's been corrected by now. But it was before the sim went through. I like Zion at 8,200. I think the price is pretty much correct. 1.25 points per minute on this season. Capable of going out and doing this in just 26 minutes. Put up a 47-point night. That's pretty good. God forbid he should give you 32 minutes on a night like that and really break the slate. 20% of the top 150 against an 11% win rate on DraftKings. So we're getting a little more of them, or at least at that point we were. Yeah, his ownership went up on DK as well. But he's much more popular on the FanDuel slate. Yeah, so the current FanDuel ownership is like twice our healthy exposure here in the projections. And it's on DraftKings. DraftKings just a few points ahead. So maybe be with the field on DK if the field is in this kind of a territory. 20-ish% on DK. And then you want to go 20-25% on FanDuel. I don't think that's inappropriate. It just puts you well below the field, surprisingly, after that changed. Given the 20% win rate, I think it's probably safer to keep him in that territory, 20-25%, rather than chase the field up the ladder. I think he's got opportunity to succeed in this spot, but I don't know that I don't see justification to get to him where the field's at. Playable down board guys. Jaren Jackson looks okay on FanDuel. Less so on DraftKings. 8,200 power forward and center. He came up 10% of the time in winners, but just 4% of the time in the top 150. At 9,000 on FanDuel, 14% across the board. Playable, non-priority over there. Dunk Robinson we talked about. Not one I'm overly enthused about, but very, very playable out of the mid-range. George Niang, Jonathan Isaac, Lamar Stevens. Nothing on FanDuel. High mid-single digits on DraftKings. All of them are playable on DraftKings. Niang for 4,000. Jonathan Isaac at 32. Lamar Stevens at 41. It's just we're talking about some price-driven plays. Niang with 26 minutes. Isaac only at 16. And Lamar Stevens at 20. Isaac and Stevens just give you reasonable points per minute upside in the brief time that they play. And then Niang has a little bit of price-based potential. Slipped into the starting lineup the other day, played 26, put up 29.6 on the FanDuel scale. It's obviously ahead of his season-long pace. Maybe a little bit of even additional upside that's not necessarily reflected here. Where did I put him today? Give him a little bit more than his season-long number, but I didn't give him up to the 1+ per minute. Happy medium. What he really did the other day was just absolutely murdered the Sam Merrill play. And we are not going back to that one today. Not unless things radically change there. I mean, if we get Sam Merrill starting, then I think you do go back to it. But yeah, with an expectation of 18 minutes, completely ruined my day the other day. I left him in that lineup. I was like, I still think he gets out there 28 minutes, and now nobody's going to have him. So if he knocks down a couple of shots, and he just did not deliver at all. Kelly Oubre, I think we talked about him before, but again, playable win rate, but coming up less than the field, coming up less than the win rate. I don't dislike the option, though. Those, moderate price guys out of Philly. And with Nick Batum still questionable, some additional expectation there, potentially. Grant Williams looks pretty playable on FanDuel at 5,100. Another piece from that Charlotte and Washington game. 17% winner, 16% of the top 150. Just a 7 and change winner on DraftKings and only 2% of the top 150 there. And the ownership went away. Looks like they're running an update in the background on ownership, which is always good. Hey, he's not that popular. He's like 4 times more popular than where we landed on him in the top 150 there, but not runaway train popular by any means. It's around what this win rate is. I have no real issue if you wanted to go 8-10% of Grant Williams on DraftKings, but definitely looks like a higher priority on FanDuel at just 51. Vince, we talked about. Devo, we talked about. Santi Aldama, I don't dislike. 6,000 power forward and center eligible on the FanDuel slate, gives you 12% across the board. Came out and put up 43 in 35 minutes the other night. Still priced fairly effectively. 6,000 also on the DraftKings slate, not nearly as effective. Against that lower cap, that has a big, big impact. 3.4% winner, 2% of the top 150. I do like Santi there, though, if we're looking for pieces from the Memphis side. Everybody's least favorite player in the NBA, at least this week. Kyle Slow-Mo Anderson. Not coming through on either site today. I'm happy to report. Despite essentially the same opportunity as he had the other day, at 5,900, both forward spots on this slate, it's just really not effective. It has nothing to do with the fact that he only put up 11.6 in 27.7 minutes the other night. My dislike of him does. It has a whole hell of a lot to do with that. And every other game where I've had him where he's done that to me over the past however many years. Somebody said it pre-lock in the chat, and I totally agreed with them in our Discord the other day. Just, he is a player who has murdered me time and again. And we just keep on going back there when he looks right, which is the nature of the beast, unfortunately. But today we don't have to do it because he came up 0% of the time on DraftKings and 0% of the time on FanDuel. A little bit in winners, 1% of the time in winners on FanDuel, 3% of the time in winners on DraftKings. If you want to cling to that and play some Kyle Anderson, I wish you luck. Cue the 50-point Kyle Anderson day. Jalen Williams, low single digits on both sites. A very high-end option on any given slate. A guy you can mix in for a few shares, but not looking like a priority by any means. Tobias, like we talked about before, I do think there's a little bit of hidden upside there that won't necessarily reflect through the Sims. Trey Murphy doesn't look all that viable on either site. Don't really see any outlier types at the forward spots. So a lot of commonality across forward between the two sites. Let's jump to center. We are getting now to 553. Oh, Trey, you had issues with the stream? Anybody else? I never get any indication as to whether things are live or if I'm just sitting here talking to myself for the last 20 minutes. Outside of when you guys talk to me in the chat. Trey likes Trey Murphy. Yeah, go figure. Those Treys always stick together. Yeah, I don't dislike Trey Murphy. Trey. I think I just went away from him. He was down in this territory somewhere. Yeah, right there. I think he's another guy where there's maybe a little bit of additional hidden potential there for 56. Shooting guard, small forward on the DraftKings slate. 2% winner. He didn't come up in our top 150, but I think he's easily playable there. I mean, you saw it right here. 45.7 on your FanDuel scale in 30 minutes the other night. That'll get you there all day for 5,600 on DraftKings. On FanDuel at 6,900, it's a completely different play. I don't necessarily like it. No positional flex. Significantly higher even against the higher cap. Don't really like it over here. I think there's maybe a little bit of hidden value there. Little bit. Playable, not a priority. The HDMI screwing them up. Yeah, anytime you pay for something like that, it just ends up creating more problems than it was worth. Hate that. Hate that nonsense. It was like when I plugged in the video game controller on the fancy video game computer, and then it switched all my microphone inputs, and For 2 days I was doing a show, or for 2 weeks I was doing a show that sounded like this. It was all thin and weird and tinny. Then I realized that it was because it triggered the microphone on my PlayStation 5 controller. And we were doing the show broadcast through that under the desk the entire time. I'm actually surprised it sounded as good as it did. But yeah, anytime I plug in something, 2 other things go completely haywire. Kuzma, top of the board among centers on DraftKings. Not a lot of good centers today. Jaren Jackson, obviously a very good point per dollar option, at least in the past, has come down significantly this year, but one of the better point per dollar guys on the board today. Chet Holmgren, obviously very high end in terms of points per dollar. Kuzma, but mixed in, I mean, Dean Wade, Bruno Fernando, Rashawn Holmes. Capella is not all that high end anymore. Just in terms of the minutes, really, you're talking about 25 minutes a night out of Capella. The points per minute is still fine, but not an aggressively high-end center anymore. Jared Allen, I do like the player, but DFS-wise, just kind of priced appropriately today. Paul Reed, maybe we get a little bit of upside at 62.55 on DraftKings. Looks like we got a little value out of him on DraftKings, if nothing else. But it's not a very deep center slate. Bam is hiding down here. I do think Bam is interesting. He was coming up in optimal lineups when I just ran some optimals off before, but not necessarily simming through all that well, which is very interesting. Nick Richards is a cheapo play, a little bit on FanDuel, a little bit on DK. Not a lot of depth at center here, though. So Bruno, again, just at the price, Bruno Fernando at 4,400, center only on DraftKings. He's got power forward eligibility, which makes him a whole hell of a lot more appealing on the FanDuel slate. For 4,200, he's been at 1.06 per minute, 17.5% usage rate over the course of the entire season. Played 25 the other night, put up 31. I'll basically take that at 4,200. I want a little bit more, but I'll basically take that. Good per minute upside, 66% of the top 150 on FanDuel, landing a lot at power forward. And then 52% win rate over on the FanDuel slate. On DraftKings, you'd still got to him 22% of the time. One of the leading centers by exposure, 12% win rate. So he looks like a decent value over there. The field was, where is he? I continue to hate how these games are in a different order, site to site. Yeah, so we got to him at a decent clip ahead of the field. The field's exposure on DraftKings is right about where that win rate is. So we piled another 10 or so percentage points on top of the field. I have no issues doing that. I think it's a pretty good value play. Even at 200 more on DraftKings as compared to FanDuel. Still functional at worst. So among center only guys, we've got 3 of those. Right there. Those 3 pull 49.3% of the popularity. If you add these 2 in, it's another 63% between Chet, Bruno, Rashawn Holmes, Capella, and Jared Allen. Presumably a fair amount of Kuzma, Dean Wade go to the power forward spots. Wade, we talked about again. It's just price driven. The lowest usage on the board among anybody expected to see any kind of time today. 10%. 0.73 per minute FanDuel, 0.72 per minute DraftKings. Doesn't really come up as a priority by any means on FanDuel. He's playable, 7.9% winner, just got to him 4% of the time in the top 150. But on DraftKings at that low price, 3,800, one of the only functional $3,800 or 4,000 or less pieces that we've got on this slate. At 3,200, Jonathan Isaac is down here, but we're expecting a significant chunk fewer minutes. But that said, you've got basically almost 0.4 of a fantasy point per minute more. 5 additional minutes, Jonathan Isaac closes that gap really, really fast on most nights for 600 less. But right now, the expectation is that Dean Wade's just going to see enough time to exceed any kind of... Isaac probably still has the better ceiling, But the median projection is going to land Dean Wade ahead, and it's going to push him up in Sims a significant amount more. But just not a lot of $3,000 value. Rashawn Holmes is one of them at 3,700. That actually probably would have been a more apt comparison since he's right there compared to Dean Wade up there. Center only for Rashawn Holmes. 11.9% winner, 12% of the top 150 on DraftKings. About half that in terms of win rate on FanDuel at 4,700, just 3% of the top 150. Another piece coming out of Charlotte and Washington. Washington obviously missing some big bodies. He is reasonably popular. Oh, come on. This populating the ownership thing is brutal. Ooh, he dipped on. Interesting. So we're actually a little ahead of the field on FanDuel. He's not owned at all on the FanDuel slate. On DraftKings, it's right in line. We're like right with the public on DraftKings. It's a very different play. He's 1,000 more on the FanDuel slate against the FanDuel cap. But I think there's maybe a little bit to work with there. Given the 6.5% win rate, our 3% exposure is 6x the field. He is not projected for any kind of ownership on FanDuel. If you wanted to roll the dice as like a low-cost center play in a lineup, you're still only working with 25-ish minutes probably. Got him at 22, and he hit these marks. You give him the 25, a little bit above a point per minute, you can get there with Rashawn Holmes tonight at very low ownership. It's not a high-end play, but it's one if you're building out. I think I would roll it, maybe once, maybe twice in 20 lineups. And certainly a handful of times in 150. I just got him at 0.94 tonight. Not really, off the season-long projection by any means. He put up better than a point per minute the other night. I don't dislike that as just a sneaky low priority, but just something that not a lot of people are going to have that's going to put you onto a different kind of construction path. He is getting blocked off a little bit by the fact that like Bruno's there for 500 less and obviously occupying a ton of those shares. And that 500 could be very important. So that's what's squeezing him a little bit. But I don't think it's the craziest pivot in the world. If you've got the 500 and you wanted to say, I'll save 100 somewhere and then I'll play Jared Allen at power forward instead of Jaren Jackson at power forward, and I'll take the shot on Rashawn Holmes over Bruno Fernando in this one lineup, right? It's minor changes like that. If you change minor downgrade to two other guys, then you can grab your $500 there. And again, you're going for a 6% win rate against a guy with a 52% win rate when you make that pivot. So know what you're doing, but you're taking a guy at sub 1% ownership that I think does have a little bit of upside. Capella can get there, 16% winner on FanDuel. 5,800 is, correctly priced for what he is now. 25 minutes a night, put up 23 and 22.9 minutes the other night. A little bit of give and take between him and Bruno, between who's getting 23, who's getting 25, but that's about how it's been lately. But additional missing bodies there. Could be a couple of extra minutes for somebody. I like Capella, just kind of is who he is kind of a scenario here, though. 9% winner on DraftKings, 5% of the top 150. A little bit higher priority on FanDuel at 5,800 center only. Jared Allen continuing along with no Evan Mobley there, and then obviously the other missing parts from Cleveland pushes his usage up a little bit. 37 minutes the other night, put up 45 FanDuel points. That said, just 7% winner, 2.6% of the top 150 on FanDuel, 8% across the board at 7,900 on DraftKings. A little bit better looking on DraftKings for the money. Just kind of correctly priced for this situation on FanDuel, I think. Differentiated Grant Williams, who we talked about already, but Definitely looks better on FanDuel than he does over on DK. Doesn't have center eligibility on FanDuel. Does have center eligibility on DraftKings. That's why he's on the board again here. Nobody else really. Bam is okay. Bam is very, very playable on any given slate. Interesting matchup going up against that OKC team. I could see both Bam and Chet getting a little bit fiery and competitive in there. Both of them having decent days. I could also see it the other way where they both knock each other down a peg. It seems like that's impacting Bam a little bit more at his price, 8,400, 8,300. Chet at 8,174 is coming through significantly higher. But like I said, when I ran optimals, just on raw, putting together the quote unquote best configuration, Bam was in a lot of like the top 10 optimals, but did not sim through well. What's his public? I think this is the last one we're going to look at, and then we'll jump and take a quick look at some lineups. It is 6:05. Yeah, we're well below the field in those sim results on Bam. Holy hell. Field is like double the win rate for their popularity. If you want to go, it's tricky because he is one of the higher end just overall players on kind of a ugly slate. Right? We talked about SGA being the only guy in the 50s and the only guy priced above 10,000 today. That puts Bam on one of the higher tiers of the entire slate. Given that the public is well ahead of the win rate that we're getting, though, I'd say 8-10% maybe on both sites. Grab a little bit more than what we're coming up with in the Sims here, but don't go crazy with it. It's probably about right. Nick Richards is playable at 6% across the board on FanDuel, a little bit less than that on DraftKings. Joval, not really showing us anything on either site. 1%, but obviously there's ceiling there. 1.23 points per minute on FanDuel, 1.23 on DraftKings. Wendell, we know he's playing now, but doesn't look all that relevant on either site. And that's about it. Beantown, TJ Warren's interesting. He played, 16 last night, I think? Who even knew he was on the team? Then all of a sudden he was available. Wasn't on either slate. Where the hell is he? Oh, shit. I forgot. I deleted him. He's not on the DraftKings slate, so he didn't go through the sim, and he was just sorting to the top against the 0. But he had single digits on FanDuel. And I believe he's not on the DraftKings slate. Yeah, he was just at low single digits returns on FanDuel. Did they add him to DraftKings? Is he on the slate? Yeah, he was in here when I ran it, but then, like I said, I deleted him. Oh, come on. Yeah, played 16 last night. Put up 8 FanDuel points. 0.51 per minute. I've got him projected at 12 FanDuel points, so I'm obviously giving him a little bit more credit than the 0.5 he is in the past. Has been a good player. But yeah, right now I'm just not giving him all that much. I think I put him right back at the 16 minutes. And obviously he didn't come up on FanDuel. If you are expecting him to go out to 20 plus, there's maybe a little bit more to cling to there. But I mean, first off, you would need him added to the slate. If he's added at like 3,000 on DraftKings and you give him a few additional minutes, if you can get him to like a 15-point projection and that's his price, then maybe. What's the easiest way for me to check that? Probably in the optimizer. As near as I can tell, he's still not on the DraftKings slate. He was a 0.88 per minute player last year. So maybe one to keep in our pocket for upcoming games in the next week or so, as he's on the team and getting some run, but still at low cost probably. Keep an eye on him. But right now, not really crushing the board unless something has changed that I don't have in front of us. Trey, did you catch the Rashawn Holmes answer? We did talk about him. Not sure if you asked that question before I talked about him or after. He's right here. Looks very, very playable. 12% across the board. 3,700. I got no issue with it at all. On FanDuel at 47 was where it was a little bit more complicated. But yeah, DraftKings, where you're going to be playing, definitely looks like a easily playable value. One of the better options from the sub 4 tier. I like him better than Dean Wade, who simmed out a little bit better. Just in a points per minute, it's a few points more of additional usage in similarly small time, but just in a points per minute, past performances, et cetera, type of thinking. I would probably, if I'm building 2 or 3 lineups, like I know you do, Trey, I would probably lean Rashawn Holmes if it's a spot for like one of those lineups. If you're saying, all right, all 3 of these lineups, I want a cheapo $3,000 guy, I would, maybe you grab one Dean Wade, one Rashawn Holmes, and then maybe go all the way down the board. And I don't want to tell you to grab a Jonathan Isaac. Maybe you grab like 1 Dean Wade and 2 Rashawn Holmes if you wanted to do it that way. I do prefer the Holmes play in a points per minute sense a little bit. And you can see that reflected in their last game, right? 25 minutes, 27 FanDuel points, 30 minutes, 13 FanDuel points. Don't need to be a rocket scientist to put together which one of those is a better game. Let's take a look. 612. I just keep pushing these shows longer and longer. Let's look real quick at AceMind. AceMind.io, where we get all our sims. Where we run our sims. Optimizer for basketball, MMA, PGA, MLB coming soon. Sims for those same sports. And just some good people running the show over at AceMind. So some of this will have changed. This is DraftKings. There's Rashawn Holmes in your top DraftKings lineup. We were getting a good chunk of Terry Rozier in some of those. Brandon Ingram, fairly comfy. Brandon Miller was coming up a ton. Davis Bertans. What we've got is a lot out of Washington and Charlotte. 3 Washington players, 2 Charlotte players in that top lineup. 2 Charlotte, 3 Charlotte, 2 Washington, 2 Charlotte, 2 Charlotte, 2 Washington, 3 Charlotte. That's going to be a heavy, heavy mix through a lot of these lineups. Misic is going to come up even more. DeJounte Murray comes up a fair amount of the time. A lot of Bruno Fernando through the center spot, along with your Rashawn Holmes. There's 3 of your values illustrated in those top 3 lineups at the center spot. Rashawn Holmes, Bruno Fernando, and Dean Wade all right there. You can see the subtle differences in those lineups. Rozier Ingram, Rozier Miller, Murray, Misic. That gets you Bridges as well. Zion. This is a pretty good lineup, actually. Depending on what George Niang does. I don't dislike how those constructions go. Those are pretty decent lineups. So it looks overall, I think it's fairly straightforward that you're going to be playing a lot of like Misic and that mid-range Terry Rozier, Misic, maybe some CJ value type through here. And then you can get Murray over here, obviously, if you want him, or you put him back on that end. This one's interesting. Well, it uses Misic as a shooting guard. That's why. Most of the Misic shares fall at the point. But you can see you do have some case to play him at shooting guard. Looks like we're getting more spendy overall, though, with a lot of Ingram shares, some Millers falling at shooting guard. Same thing at the small forward spot with both of those players, obviously. But you've got Denny in that range, Corey Kispert in that range. A little bit of room for Zion at power forward. A little bit of room for Kuzma. Yeah, it looks like mostly going to that tier about on power forward. Basically saving money in most of the center spots. Outside of your Chet share there and there. These are mostly Paul Reed's, Bruno's, Richaun Holmes. Fairly spendy mid-range guard, fairly spendy mid-range forward. A lot of just whoever you didn't use on the front end, you use on the back end. And then it looks like we're mostly saving money at the util spot. And again, it's a matter of what you played elsewhere in the lineup. But like this one's got Chet there. That one's got Rozier there. But we've got a lot of Bertans, Fernando, Niang types coming up over there. That top lineup brought you back 129 against your 4. Not the greatest win rate in the world. Top one was Rozier, Ingram, Miller, Bertans, Richaun Holmes, Karis LeVert, Kyle Kuzma, Danny Avdija. I do like the way that all three of those top 3 look. You got technically $100 left to spend there, $200 in that one, and on the money there. FanDuel wise, let's take a very quick look at the site. Fewer of you care about. This is obviously going to be a little bit different as well. A lot of locked in same if you scan across these columns. Micic in basically a 1-and-1 situation here, but you could go value with like a Lowry Micic combo. Not a ton of SGA. A little bit of them. Like 4 or 5 shares as I scroll down there. DeJounte Murray, high priority play. Whether it's at the point or at shooting guard. We're getting a ton of Murray. Looks like there's good room to get Murray plus. We've got a lot of Karis LeVert, which we were expecting. Center spot is interesting. With this breakdown, that's a pretty aggressive mix, actually. Holmgren, Capella, Fernando, Jackson, Allen, and Paul Reed all make up the top 6 lineups there. So 6 different centers in the top 6 lineups is interesting, but we do have Bruno in a fair chunk of these as a value guy at the power forward spot. Jaren Jackson we got once in the power forward spot. Bruno obviously a key piece of value on FanDuel today. I don't love the idea of Bruno and Clint Capella together. That would just maths through a little bit, but that's not my favorite. Although, like I said, I do think there's a little bit of opportunity to see additional time given just missing bodies, but not my favorite configuration there. Danny Avdija is coming up a lot. It basically looks like 1-1 through most of these positions. A lot of Brendan Miller. A lot of LeVert. Nothing crazy jumping out at me as I'm looking through these. It kind of just jibes with what we were looking at on the slate. Oh, I'm not here for Bruno Fernando Day. It's not my favorite option on the board. I hate these types. I really do. It's funny because I typically do like the lower end, defensively oriented, low total type slates where it gets a little sloppy, a little bit ugly. But a lot of times on those days, I feel like we've got a few better stars than we have to work with. Maybe like DeJounte Murray, yeah. SGA, like Zions and Brandon Ingrams of the world. SGA, easily the top name on the slate. Just makes it ugly. Like these lineups, even when you've got good players in these, obviously it is Starsy, Scrubsy oriented. We've got DeJounte, SGA, and Zion in that lineup. But it doesn't have that like oomph. It doesn't have that Luka. It doesn't have that Giannis, SGA you can put on that tier. I have no issue calling SGA on that tier. But a lot of these lineups don't even get to SGA as the only 10,000 plus player on the entire slate. Ugly lineup day. Use a lot of the guys we talked about. Make your lineup look ugly and uncomfortable. Spend most of your money. And if you've got 5 or 6 of these guys with a couple of pivots in there, I think you're building some pretty good lineups. But again, FanDuel, same thing. Just aggressive Charlotte. Less aggressive Washington, but there's a lot of 1-2 Washington types mixed in most of these lineups. Charlotte, Washington, Atlanta. Atlanta's coming through very strong on the FanDuel slate. And then, like I said to start the show, get to some pieces and parts from that Miami OKC game, and you can afford the better pieces from that game. That's the good news out of that one. A lot of Jimmy, a lot of Chet, some Bam. Actually, Bam we don't see a ton of, which is interesting because, again, remember, we didn't get a ton of them in our sim results, but he was coming up a lot in optimals. It'd be interesting to see Bam's exposure publicly and how he comes through from other sites. But let me jump. 6:20. About 10 minutes. We'll have everything updated. 6:30 update will go up on the site. We'll get some lineups built. And that will be that for Friday, gang. We did it. We made it. Another weekend. No shows over the weekend as usual, but I'll be around for questions in the Discord. Projections will be up on the site. Anybody wants to talk baseball, I'm here. If you got any baseball drafts coming up, anything like that, I am happy to talk baseball all day and night. Hit me up with your draft questions. That's it. Other than that, good luck out there tonight, you guys. A lot of money on deck. Somebody go win something tonight. And I will see you back here on Monday. Adios.